Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Very good morning, dear friends and colleagues, excellencies, ambassadors. Delighted and humbled that I should be offered this opportunity to exchange and share some of my thoughts on such an important subject matter that we are all discussing and event that we are marking. I'd like to take this opportunity to share essentially three basic points. The first one, I think, is one that many of us would quite readily, I hope, align to, is the notion that the Bandung Conference was transformative. It wasn't simply a conference where leaders gather and have a wonderful time, an event, essentially, but it was actually fundamentally transformative. And not many a conference nowadays are actually of that type. We had a situation in 1955 of 29 leaders of 29 nations in Asia and Africa came to Bandung with all the various problems and challenges that they face respectively in their own countries. And yet, they had the wisdom and they have the audacity to transform the world. Leadership matters, and that's what the leaders then demonstrated. They didn't simply attend an event, have photographs taken, but actually offered transformative leadership. I need not go into detail the shape and form of that transformation, but by way of simple illustration, though there is a risk of oversimplification naturally, imagine 2 decades after 1955. Then in 1955, there were some 76 member states of the United Nations. 2 decades later, almost doubled to 144 by the end of 1975. 2 decades, the number of member states of the United Nations doubled. People become independent and freed from colonial domination. That, I think, is transformative. We may think nowadays that is something that is to be expected, but it certainly wasn't the case in 1955. And these leaders led, they transformed, they changed things. Aside from the numerical change in the number of member states that Bandung helped unleash, we saw new ideas on how we can deal with the problem or challenge of geopolitical competition. Prior to Bandung, we were led to believe that we have to choose sides. You are either the East or the West. However one describes the contesting party, but essentially, the suggestion made was that for countries like ours, of the Global South, we simply follow. This is what Bandung rebelled against. We say we have a third voice, we have alternative, we have choice. And as a result of Bandung, we have the non-aligned movement born soon after. The idea that countries like Indonesia, like India and others, we have autonomy, we have an independent capacity to decide on the merits of each case, how we should position ourselves. Bandung matters. And not least of all, we brought, as others have spoken just now, development agenda very much to the forefront. For some of us who are of sufficient vintage, we may recall actually talks of new international economic order in the 70s was in such a vogue. That's why we have the G77 plus China, UNCTAD, and all the wonderful processes. These are born from the Bandung spirit that others have referred to. Essentially, as I'm probably speaking among the converted, hopefully, or like-minded at least, Bandung has been transformative. And I yearn for similar conferences today, where leaders don't simply come, have Instagram moment captured, but actually lead, provide thought leadership of for the next 70 years. Transformative. The second element that I wanted to share, again, something that all of you can probably far more than I could possibly do, describe and analyze, is the state of our world today. Fragmentation, division, geopolitical, that's becoming ever deeper, ever wider such that the impact is no longer on geopolitical domain, but also on global common issues, on technology, on trade, naturally, that we are all speaking of today. Headwinds against diplomacy, against multilateralism. People like myself and Hasan Wirawida, who I wish to acknowledge in this room, we have diplomacy in our DNA. We love to solve disputes. That's what we are all about. Not making problems, but solving problems, hopefully. But we are seeing headwinds against diplomacy nowadays. Diplomacy is seen to be a sign of weakness, of acquiescence, of appeasement even. Multilateralism facing headwinds, risk of miscalculation, and many other ailments and ills that we are able to describe at length, and can take ages in describing this phenomenon. By the way, I feel that the fact that we are facing those problems vindicate rather than detract from the Bandung principles. The fact that we are still grappling with those problems, the geopoliticals that was prevalent in 1955, prevalent now as well, surely it reminds how eternal and how continually relevant is Bandung's message. But the issue to me is not simply marking, commemorating, but how do we respond? How should countries of the so-called global south, or I prefer the term global majority to be frank, how should we respond? In the domain of geopolitical alignment, for instance, is there more that we can aspire to than saying we don't wish to choose? We wish to maintain our strategic autonomy. We wish to remain neutral. Exhortations and appeal to the so-called major powers, and I have to use the term so-called whenever I use the term major powers, because Bandung principles speak of equality of states. There are no large, middle, small. We are all sovereign equals. How do we go beyond appeal for restraint, expression of concern? Now, in my happy conditions today, where I am happily retired, I deserve to stop at this point. I think. Elena. It is not for me to offer prescription or policy response. My task is simply to bring out the problems. Saying Bandung matters, Bandung was great, I was born in Bandung, which helps in saying that. Second point, the world is fragmented, the world is troubled, and so far I've seen a lot of responses in terms of not to choose and etc. But how do we actually respond to this thing? I think this is the key point, and I wish I could attend, but I couldn't attend later on because I have to leave a bit earlier. I had looked forward to the government's remark on this, our government, Indonesia's government, because this is the real substantive policy response, which I'm sure we are all clamoring for. I could stop here, but I will take the risk of venturing a little bit further. How do we then respond? And this is just more the reflection of a very much retired person. Identity. How do we describe ourselves now? The original meeting in Bandung was Asia-Afrika, geographic concept, but clearly the Bandung principles resonate far beyond Asia and Africa. We have your Latin America and Africa and other continents involved. But even in terminology that we use, whether it be global south, emerging powers, global majority, they are mix and match. But maybe perhaps that doesn't matter as much. The label maybe doesn't matter. But I do believe, first and foremost, the first order of business before we talk with anyone else, we need to consolidate between ourselves. Do we really communicate with one another beyond within the BRICS or beyond within the G20? Is the Global South our first point of reference when we face a common crisis? The pandemic, the trade issue now, climate crisis issue. Because we need to build the habit of cooperation, of consultation. That's what we did in ASEAN. A sense of we feeling in ASEAN wasn't legislated. It didn't come about by sheer adoption of declarations, but through patient, painstaking communication, building the habit of connecting between leaders. And I'm just wondering, maybe Global South can be a victim of its own success. The number involved of the countries, how can we, within such a large group, develop the notion of better communication, to consolidate our thoughts and be seen to be on the same page? I can't speak of the present, but I can speak of the past. At the United Nations, for instance, whenever we have the UN General Assembly, foreign ministers of the non-aligned movement always meet. And at the time, it was proper foreign ministerial level. Not some foreign ministers to come, deliver a statement, off they go, and then some stuff. But we actually met, compare notes at the UN. The NAM caucus within the UN Security Council, very powerful group. Whenever issues are to be discussed in the UN Security Council, the NAM caucus, the non-aligned movement caucus at the UN, we deliberate amongst ourselves to come up with a common position. Communication opens possibilities, and I'm not sure to what extent, before we talk about the global governance, whether our own governance is fit for purpose within the Global South. Can we have a bit more timely and actionable type of communication? And perhaps a subject matter that many may not wish to raise, the reality is that much of the world's conflict occurs in the Global South. Whether it be interstate, within state, we need to get our house in order. Let's begin with ourselves. Let's apply those Bandung principles in the way we behave with one another. Non-use of force in the settlement of disputes among countries. Let's begin that principle between us. Peaceful settlement of disputes, we say. Let's begin apply that principle within us. Then we can deliver on the promise that we have, the economic dynamics that's moving to the global south, the natural resources and riches that we enjoy and we are endowed with. In short, I feel that there are several actionable policy bullet points that are needed or that are available for us to consolidate within the global south itself. And this is an in-house effort. We don't need to be angry with the world. We can be smarter, a fit-for-purpose global south that's agile, that's able to respond quickly to developments. Just very quick, several dynamics or elements that the ambassador had mentioned before. I do feel for the global, for Bandung spirit to remain relevant, it has to earn that relevance. We cannot simply mark events, but we need to ensure that we are fit for purpose. Now, one theme that I'm sure that we will hear throughout today is the notion of our common position on reform of global governance. But how? As I said, I should have stopped at the beginning, earlier, but this is the how issue is the one that our policymakers needs to come up with. When you say reform of the global governance, whether it be Bretton Woods, UN Security Council, or the United Nations in general, what do you have in mind? How do you deal with our own respective inter-global South divisions? Honestly. So we need to have the concrete manifestation and example of how quick wins to illustrate how a global governance may look. And by the way, reform of the global governance, it is not simply tinkering with organizations, with methodologies, with membership, but it's about the mindset as well. Multilateralism is an ism, it's a perspective, it's a paradigm. And threats against multilateralism is not only coming from the so-called major powers in their rivalry and geopolitical contestation, but also from inward-looking foreign policies, many of which some countries in the global south are also entertaining. Anti-globalist, anti-multilateralist outlook is not the exclusive preserve of the so-called major powers. It is finding its manifestation in other countries as well. Country first, inward-looking foreign policy. On the geopolitics, for instance, how are we to remain relevant? I'm most familiar with ASEAN and its predicament in our part of the world. Can we promote the notion of strategic stability? How can the global south be far more detailed and eloquent than simply saying we are a bridge? Bridge to where? What kind of bridge? Why you can't simply earn a bridging role by repeating that mantra. You have to earn the trust, the confidence, the reputation has to be earned. Belief in diplomacy, I had already cited. Belief, respect, Bandung says. What an amazing document, 1955. Respect for fundamental human rights. Less people think that human rights is the purview of Western countries pontificating and telling us what to do. Bandung says respect for human rights, the principles of democracy. My remit actually was only to describe problems. Bandung is great, many problems. The last bit, their policy response is not my responsibility today, it's someone else's. But I ventured to mention some by way of teasing out and to be thought-provoking, hopefully. But I am so glad, and I wish to pay tribute to all colleagues in CSIS, Pak Yusuf Wanandi in particular, and all the others, for taking the initiative to have this gathering. Absent CSIS, the next few days that we should be marking Bandung would have gone with deafening silence. But thanks to CSIS initiative, we are where we are, and I'm sure we can get some good outcomes as a result. Thank you very much.